I appreciate being a part of your show.
Absolutely. Well, Bewitched Continuum. I
Yes.
what a great subject. I don't know if there isn't anyone who hasn't seen Bewitched or doesn't love the show. What got you started on the book? Are you just a huge fan like all of us?
Oh, well, I'm definitely a huge fan. Mainly what happened with the book was, aside from being a fan of the show since I was 8 years old and recording the show on cassette tapes before VCRs, I also worked with Continuity quite a bit. I wrote script coverage for some studios there in LA. And also I write opinion columns for SoapCentral.com where I dissect the soap opera The Bold and the Beautiful. So, when you start dealing with continuity in that way, you tend to watch everything, TV, movies. You start just kind of looking at things through a new lens. And, of course, I was going back and watching the show, Bewitched, and just noticing, this is interesting. In this episode, they say that witches can't use their powers in the past, but in this episode, you obviously can, so what's going on there? And it just sort of snowballed from there, and I thought it would be interesting to line up all the episodes back to back and see how they compare to each other.
So, how many hours total did you sit there?
Well, there are 254 episodes.
Oh.
So just in watching time alone, that's got to be 120 something hours, and then of course there's all the notes and the writing, and I went through each episode twice actually. So it was a lot of work, but when it's a subject that you feel passionate about, it doesn't feel like a lot of work.
So did you grow to love the characters more? After watching them for so long.
Oh, sure. Obviously, they're almost like, and I think anybody that has watched the show since they were a child would feel this. They're almost like old friends. But definitely watching the show in order and taking notes, for continuity, definitely got me to know the characters a little bit more intimately than I did before, and also to appreciate things about the show that I hadn't appreciated before.
So how was the transition for you from Dick Sargent to Dick York? Was it easy, or did you have to adjust for a little bit?
Well, for me, it wasn't really an issue because when in syndication, which is how I first discovered the show as a child, they'd mix the episodes up, and one day you're watching Darren as Dick York, and another one you're watching Dick Sargent. So I really didn't think about it. And plus, in soap operas, they do high-profile recasts all the time. But I'm sure that audiences in 1969, when they first turned on their television for the season premiere, they were going, "What's going on here?" I'm sure that really must have been a major adjustment.
Because it's great that you saw them in order. Because I think that's such a big endeavor. When you started. And you've seen the black and white, because everyone's seen them. Everyone, quote unquote. As you're watching them, you see them from the black and white, and you're taking notes, and you see them change over the years. What was the biggest thing that really stuck out in your mind? It's like, wow, look at that in regards to the series or the actors.
Well, I think because the show ran in years during a very volatile time in society, really, from the mid-'60s with the civil rights movement starting through the whole hippie counterculture and into the free love of the early 70s, just going from the kind of quaintness of the first episode and then getting into the plaid pants and the kind of saucier dialogue of A season, that's really the biggest difference to me.
Oh, just the actual writing and such, and just the verbiage that they're using?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it definitely was a transition. It really started more around fourth season, but yeah, just going from the black and white to the full-out hippie stuff. It's really cool. But it's interesting that the show just happened to air during this time where, it was a real reflection of, American culture as a whole.
Right. As you were doing all your research, did you read biographies to find out more about the actors themselves and what their take on the series was, or were you just primarily just focused on the series in general and just what came from that?
No, I was just focused on the series in general. I mean, there are a lot of wonderful books out there already that cover the behind-the-scenes aspects, and I suggest that highly that people go read them. I just wanted to focus on the fictional aspects of the show, so I actually didn't really look at anything except my laptop and the DVD player and my notebook. Although there were a few times, if I wanted to refer to something historical, like the Salem witch trials, or Leonardo da Vinci's part in history because he happened to be in an episode, then I would look things up on Wikipedia. But for the most part, it was just me and the DVDs. and just taking a look at it and trying to get the nuances that the audience would get from the show. Exactly. The point of view from which I wrote the book, that's why I call it the ultimate linear guide, because I wanted to take people through, if they were to read the book in order, to kind of have the audience's experience of watching the show for the first time in the 60s and early 70s. Naturally, you don't have to read the book in order, but if you do choose to come at it from that direction, it does kind of mirror the audience experience. So let me ask about, obviously, the witchcraft. That's the big draw of the whole show. What was some of the inconsistencies with regarding the show to like actual witchcraft? Were there things that stood out for you that you kind of knew about beforehand, then when you see them do it on the show, it's like, it wasn't quite like that? Well, I mean, it's not like I know a lot about actual witchcraft. I mean, I do know that real-life witches tend to use familiars, and they didn't really have that too many times on Bewitched. Also, you hear about, light magic versus dark magic, and they didn't really get into that. All the magic on Bewitched was, a lot more whimsical. I mean, even when Endora was putting her nastiest spells on Darren, it was always funny. Which was the whole point of the show. It was humor. Definitely, and just the show is so intelligently written. I mean, we're all fans of shows from that era. Gilligan's Island, The Munsters, and all of that. But sometimes they get a little silly. And Bewitched always seemed to be a step beyond that. It always seemed to be. It came off to me, at least, as a lot more intelligent. Right. I think one of the draws for me when I was watching it was always curious about how the witchcraft was genetic and how it passed from mother to daughter to daughter. I always found that fascinating. What did you find out more about that as you watched the series? Well, I mean, I thought it was kind of interesting that, and they didn't really get into it that much, but as you say, the witchcraft is genetic. But Tabitha and Adam, Samantha's children, were both only half witches. They're half mortal as well, which they didn't really get into too much. Tabitha seemed to have her full powers, but it's definitely an interesting way of approaching it. Like, for example, in the beginning of the show, there was more of a discussion of being a member of the witches community and being a member of it, as opposed to, kind of about a third of the way through where it was genetic. So that's just one of the interesting aspects of it. As you watch it, you're always wondering, at what point is it going to dawn on somebody, like in particular Larry Tate, that something truly odd is happening? Was there any episode that you feel like Larry's finally going to catch on? Very few, and you bring up such an interesting point, because I actually did mention that in the book a few times, like especially with Gladys Kravitz, the nosy neighbor. She should have caught on way sooner, and Larry definitely should have, because there were a couple of times Darren actually came out and said Samantha was a witch, of course with a big smile, but then, in the next episode, weird things are happening and Larry doesn't notice. It's part of the conceit of the show that the mortals aren't supposed to know, but, if you were to look at it a little bit more realistically, yeah, they definitely should have clued in a little bit sooner. Yeah, you always wonder, are they ever going to catch on? Somebody's got to catch on. It's you always felt sorry for Larry some of those times, but he was such an arrogant guy, wasn't he? Yeah, but I mean, I think I'm more so kind of as it went along. But you know, he's kind of supposed to be the mortal foil or the straight man, if you will. I mean, there are times I felt it was a little overboard, but at the same time, you kind of needed to have him there to stir things up.
Yeah, I think he was the perfect straight man. I like that you said that. Yeah, absolutely. You know, I loved also the episodes when Samantha's uncles would come. You know, different family members. You know.
Oh yes.
You know, some of my favorites were those. Which character came more consistently? Because I know there were always different family members. You know, one that came most often.
Well, I mean, aside from Endora, of course, she was there a lot more often. But
she was a regular.
I think Aunt Clara was there the most at first, at least until Marion Lauren passed away in 1968. I think she was in 27 episodes, where Uncle Arthur and Maurice, I think, as they were only in about 10 or 12 episodes, which is amazing when you think about it, because they made such an impression that we remember them, but they really weren't on very often. Of course, there's Serena, too. I mean, because Elizabeth Montgomery played her as well, and so she was around a little bit more often.
Great segue. I love Serena. One of their guest stars that I love, Jack Cassidy. That's like one of my favorite episodes. That he keeps thinking it's Samantha, but it's Serena, and it goes back and forth. I love that one. What little nuances did you find in that one?
Well, it actually was very similar to another episode from first season called Which Is Which, where they borrowed from that a little bit. The one you're referring to is called A Chance on Love, and that aired toward the end of sixth season. But it was a lot more sophisticated. I'm using that word again, but because they were able to be a little bit more racy by 1970, as opposed to 1964 when the first episode aired. And Jack Cassidy in that episode just had so much charisma, you know, that he's very compelling to watch on the screen. And of course, Elizabeth playing both Samantha and Serena, and then I think at one point she played Samantha pretending to be Serena while looking like Serena, and somehow Elizabeth Montgomery manages to bring both characters in at the same time, which is really amazing.
It's pretty wonderful, some of the things that they can do. You know, we look at our technology today, but they were doing this stuff back then.
Yeah, everything was practical effects. I mean, there was a little teeny bit of chroma key that they were doing, you know, about halfway through the show to the end. But yeah, everything else, when Samantha made something appear, she had to wave her hand and hold it and stay in that position until somebody off screen came and put that thing in her hand, and then continue on from there. It is really amazing when you think about it, because I mean, I know there's an art to CGI, but in some ways it was so much harder for them to do these physical effects every week on a TV show. I mean, it wasn't just a movie; they had to do this every single week. And the fact that they were able to do that is really incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's what we kind of miss. We know how hard it was, and it still looked good.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Yeah, they had it down to a science.
Absolutely. You know, when I asked you about Dick Sargent and Dick York, you know, each were their own actors, each individual, but they seemed to have picked up on Darren right away, and like they didn't miss a beat. They were like, it was perfect casting. You know, what did you see as, you know, the episode had changed?
Well, I agree with you. I mean, again, watching the show in order, and going from episode 170 with Dick York, to episode 171 with Dick Sargent. At first, it's like, oh, well, who's this guy? But you're right. Dick Sargent definitely did pick up on Darren. It's almost as if Darren as a character was its own entity, and that both of the actors were able to tap into it. So, yeah, it was definitely a seamless thing. I get asked all the time which actor I like better, and aside from the fact that it's, you know, kind of still this controversial question that I really don't want to answer, but I honestly think that both actors brought so much to the role. Some things the same, some things different, but they both really, had such a mastery of this character, and I think that's why both their performances still hold up today.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you look at them, physically they're about the same stature, tall, thin. And the only difference I really saw was that, Dick Sargent's tone was a little lower. But the facial expressions and everything else was, the timing was like it was the same person. It was interesting.
Oh, definitely. And some people talk about how Dick Sargent's Darren was a little bit more mellow about the witchcraft. But if you look at it from the show's point of view, at that point, Darren and Samantha had been married 5 years, and Darren was going to have to mellow out a little bit about it eventually anyways.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, but I love Dick York when just his eyes would just widen and his voice would hit that high pitch. I think it was just great.
Yeah, it was great.
And and perfect example, because you would think that's what someone's natural response would be as they're getting used to something supernatural.
Right. I mean, he was exposed to it every single day. I mean, he obviously wanted to continue living a mortal life, but over time, kind of seeing how Samantha really was making an effort to curtail her powers, that you would think Darren would kind of let a few things slide once in a while, and he did. Even toward 8th season, Darren was making magical suggestions to Samantha to fix things. Like, well, why don't we bend the rules and do this? It's just kind of interesting how that, how he changed over the years.
Yeah, absolutely. What I asked you about Endora, did you get accustomed to her, or were you always irritated with her character the entire time?
I could see where people might get irritated with her, because sometimes she would beat a dead horse about, Darren's going to cheat on you. Well, after 11 or 12 tests and Darren passes them all, you'd think she'd get the idea. But the thing that always made Endora work is that Agnes Moorehead was obviously having so much fun playing her, and I think that's something that's very palatable. And so she's never evil. She's just impish and mischievous. So even when she casts her nastiest spell on Darren, you're almost rooting for her just because she's having so much fun.
And I think, well, I don't know about everybody, but it always seems like she, when I talk with people, the ultimate mother-in-law. If mother-in-laws could do things to their son-in-laws, that would be the type of stuff they would do. Right. I mean, I think the stereotypical mother-in-law would turn their son-in-law into a frog if they could. Nothing that will leave permanent injury or mark, but just the momentary satisfaction of discomfort, right? Exactly. I mean, even Endora always relented and returned Darren back to normal. Nothing ever stuck. Yeah, I mean, what a great show! I think how lucky you are to be able to watch the whole thing. What? Now, let me ask. I won't ask for the favorite. Do you have like the top 5 episodes that you love? Oh, definitely. I mean, in the book, of course, I compare and contrast all the episodes to each other and within themselves. But the section that people seem to like is at the end, called Within the Continuum. There's lists of like how many times Samantha said, "Oh my stars," or how many times Endora called Darren Durwood. There's witch illnesses, and there is a list of my personal top 10 best and worst, which not everybody's going to agree with, because everybody has their own preferences and things that speak to you more than others or annoy you more than others. But one of I guess I would say my favorite episode is called Sisters at Heart. It was the 7th season Christmas episode. I don't know if you remember that one, but Tabitha had an African-American friend, Lisa, and they wanted to be sisters so badly that Tabitha accidentally zapped them with different colored polka dots. Yes. Which, of course, Samantha had to explain. And then there was another plot within there where Darren's bigoted client thought that little Lisa, was Darren's daughter, and so he didn't approve of interracial marriages, and Samantha had to kind of zap him
to kind of get him to come around. And it was just such an amazing episode because it wasn't just funny. There was this really clear message of tolerance and acceptance, and that was a theme throughout the entire show, but I think it really reached its zenith in that particular episode, and the writing was just stellar, and the performances, and so that's why it ranks as my favorite episode.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. That was leading into a question, a perfect segue, which was, do you find as you were watching the episodes that it was exactly that? A theme of tolerance. Here's someone who is vastly different. You have someone who's straight-laced, and then someone totally different. And as things come out, he has to be tolerant. He has to be understanding and such. And same with her family. He's mortal and all his idiosyncrasies. Because it's really a big theme of tolerance. Is that kind of one of the things you pulled from it? Obviously.
Oh, definitely, and I think it was intentional because it was a lot of Elizabeth Montgomery and Bill Asher's own personal beliefs that got translated into the show. It's there from the very, very beginning. I think there is also a bit of a transition going from the beginning of the show toward the end, where in the beginning Darren's a little more weirded out by witches, and then he's kind of more accepting, whereas the witches always seem to be more prejudiced against the mortals, which is kind of interesting. But it was, it was always there, but in some episodes it was brought out more than others. And again, to remember that the show originally aired at the height of the Civil Rights Movement, so it was definitely meant to speak to the changes that were going on in America at the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it serves like a great commentary to the time. And just a couple more questions. Wanted to ask you, when you got to the last episode, and all right, this is the last one for the series. What were you feeling? What were you thinking?
What was I thinking? I think I was thinking two things. Like, wow, I can't believe I just took notes on 254 episodes. Sometimes, well, not so much with the writing of it, but with the proofreading and the editing. By the time I would get into the 200s, it's like, okay, can we just get to the last one, please? It's because, the creative process is wonderful, but then getting into the tediousness of editing and proofreading can be a little daunting. But I had a wonderful editor. His name is Herbie J. Pilato. You might know his name. He actually wrote the Bewitched book. Back in 1992, he was the one that started it all with the books about Bewitched, because before that there weren't any, and he was great to work with, and kind of, I don't want to say kept me on the straight and narrow, but there were times I expressed things a little bit more colorfully than was necessary, and he kind of, he was like, yeah, you might want to think about rephrasing that, but the other thing I felt, just in terms of writing it, was, wow, I actually did this, because it's one thing to think about something and to want to do something, but then to actually kind of bring it to fruition like this, it's a kind of magic all into itself, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's, you're diving into untangible ideas and bringing them forward for others to share. So you're kind of part warlock and part human there, aren't you?
Yeah. Everybody has their own powers, so to speak. I like to think, maybe not witchcraft, but I think that's part of the appeal of Bewitched too, is that we watch these extraordinary people doing extraordinary things, and maybe it speaks to that part of us that wants to do something extraordinary. So there is that. I hope that the book will, not only appeal to hardcore fans and nostalgia buffs, but that it will also kind of help bring the show to a new generation of audience members, because supernatural shows are really hot right now, and there's a whole slew of them. The vampire shows and the fantasy shows like Once Upon a Time, and really they all can be traced back to Bewitched, because Bewitched was the first supernatural show on the air. So I hope that it's the 50th anniversary this year. That's why I wanted the book to be out now, and I'm hoping that I just want it to be a celebration of the show and to remind people that it's there, and to introduce it to new audiences.
Fantastic, fantastic. And just one last question: social media, or where people can find out more about it, or be able to buy it, iTunes, .com.
Absolutely. That's another magic by itself.
Yes.
Of course, people can buy the Bewitched Continuum on Amazon, but I also have a website, AdamMichaelJames.com, where all the links are clickable there. By the way, it's a great holiday gift for anybody that's got a Bewitched fan in their lives. Also, there's a growing community for the Bewitched Continuum on Facebook, a group that people can join. That is at facebook.com/BWContinuum. And every Wednesday, I do something called Witchback Wednesday. Since this is the 50th anniversary of the show, every 50th anniversary of a new episode, I put that part of the episode, it's from my book, up on a blog. It's bewitchedcontinuum.tumblr.com, and people can that way kind of get an idea of what's in the book. You know how Amazon has, peek inside. This way people can go to the blog and read a little bit more of exactly what the book's approach is, and, kind of, so they're not walking in unaware.
Fantastic. Fantastic. I love the subject matter. I don't think you could have picked another show that would have been, as fun and interesting to, bring to an audience. Adam, congratulations, and thanks for taking the time and discussing your book.
Thank you so much, and I love your passion about the show too. It makes talking about it that much more enjoyable.
Absolutely. Hey, thanks again.
Okay, you're welcome.